normally, yeah, there's also a whole better. So I can't have my phone or something. And it was like $1,500.
Maybe
so they held, 3 or 4,000 or whatever it was.
Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna go live because we have our folks from Acushnet on the line. Sorry for you guys in Acushnet. We ended up having some internet issues. We're gonna have somebody come look at that, so hopefully that does not happen again tomorrow. For anybody that is watching this on YouTube or watching it live, the materials that go with this class can be found on the LAER Career Den under LAER Training and Tools, and go to the LAER New Agent Training Program, and it is the Day 3 materials, Buyer Agency and Procuring Cause. So that's the documents that you want to download for your booklet if you're watching this online. So we are going to dig into buyer presentations. Then we have an attorney here that's going to talk a little bit about procuring cause, something that I've become an expert at with a host of arbitrations over the last 30 days. I've had several mediations, or I should say. They were filed for arbitration, but it has a mandatory mediation that goes to first. So we'll talk about that as well. But first, want to talk about buyer presentations. So, how many agents here have a buyer presentation that you do? Okay, so it is not unusual for an agent not to have a buyer presentation. Typically, what happens when a buyer call comes in, either through like a lead program or a Zillow program, we immediately start asking questions and we set up an appointment and we go out and show the person a property. And what I'd say about that is that also what I've noticed in our business is a very small percentage of our agents actually get buyer agency contracts signed. So the beauty of getting a buyer agency contract signed is when you guys go out and list real estate, a listing is like money in the bank. Like, you know that there's a really good chance that that deal is going to close at some point. So you can go out and start shopping for whatever you want because you know you got a deal that's probably going to happen. Is that true with a buyer? No. So I would say it is more true with a buyer if you have a buyer agency contract signed. So what can we do to get a buyer agency contract signed? By the way, one of the books I spoke about at our sales rally was PreApproval by Robert Cialdini. He also has a book about his first book that came out, The Power of Influence. Where's Eric?
I'm right here.
What's the name of that book?
Influence.
Influence. Influence is the first book. So the first book is Influence. The second book is PreApproval. Both are by Robert Cialdini. I will say that those books are top 10 books all time, in my opinion, for salespeople on how to create influence and get people to do what you want. But what I also want to say about that is, because some of that applies to buyer agency, is that he talks about in his first book that if you can get people, and he doesn't use real estate as a reference, but the way that I compare it in our business is that by getting a buyer to sign a buyer agency contract, you have a much more likely candidate to buy a house, because you are forcing somebody, when somebody signs their name, psychologically they're making a decision in their head. That is not necessarily the case when you just go meet somebody at a house for the first time because they want to go see this property and they just came in off a floor time call or whatever. That person may not ever buy a house. We don't know what is influencing them. We know nothing right now. But if you have a buyer that is psychologically in their head signing their name to something, they are more likely to buy a house because they've already committed in their own head to buy a house, and that is represented through a signature. That's why I say to real estate agents, one reason why agents say they don't want to get a buyer agency contract signed is that, oh, all my people are very loyal, and if they don't like me, I don't want them to feel like they have to work with me anyway. But still, just for the psychological component, get them to sign the buyer agency contract. If it makes you feel better, you can put a little asterisk at the bottom of your buyer agency contract that says that you can cancel this contract anytime for any reason. So that kind of nulls the whole point of a buyer agency contract. It no longer really protects you if they decide to fire you for no reason, but it's still psychologically getting that buyer to a place in their own head that they actually want to buy property. So my thoughts about buyer agency, there are all different types of buyer agency agreements. Couple things that I want to talk about. We're going to definitely spend some time on procuring cause as well. So we just had this very similar situation that happened, and we went to a mediation over it. So if you have a client, we have the mediation that we went to was a procuring cause issue. Almost all of them are procuring cause issues because a buyer goes out and looks at a property with one agent, and then they say they don't like that property. They go look at 20 more with you or other agents, and then they go back to the original house that you showed them, but this time they go with another agent, or they end up going to an open house and buying it through the listing agent. And procuring cause is about who initially introduced the client to the property. So under the Realtor rules, and there's a whole bunch of other pieces that go to it, but the Realtor Organization feels like the agent that truly introduced the property to the client, which means the first person to take them through and show the property. There are caveats to that. Like, you're not necessarily covered by procuring cause if somebody comes into an open house and you knew that that person was coming because their real estate agent called them, things like that. But so you have procuring cause, and then you have buyer agency contracts. It's two different things, because on this particular situation, our agent did have a 6-month buyer agency contract with a buyer, where that buyer said that if I buy any real estate in the next 6 months, if I put any property under agreement, you are entitled to a commission on the property. So that buyer did go buy a piece of real estate with a different real estate company. And it was not a property that we showed. They went out on their own and looked at a totally different property and went and bought that property. So that is, our agent wanted to look at that as a procuring cause, saying, well, I have a buyer agency contract, so I'm procuring cause. That is not the case, because our agent did not go find the property. So in that instance, in my opinion, both real estate agents are entitled to a commission on that property. Our agent is entitled to a commission under the buyer agency contract. So in that situation, we can by all rights go out and sue that buyer in court to collect our commission, because we're due a commission because they put a property under agreement within the 6 months of that contract. The other agent is also due their commission because they were the procuring cause of the property. So these things come up all the time in real estate. What I always say to our agents, don't let it go so easily. I had a call last week from one of our agents who she showed a property twice to a client, and she noticed that the property went under agreement. It was not our listing. She called the listing agent and she said, do you mind if I ask who bought the property? And she said, oh yeah, the person that you showed it to twice bought the property through another real estate agent. Sorry about that. So our agent said, well, I'm going to just let it go. And I said, if you want to let it go, let it go. But I said, we definitely have a procuring cause case, and I think it's worth pursuing through the Realtor board. So if you have something like that, don't necessarily let it go. And if you feel you're procuring cause, that you've actually shown the property to somebody multiple times or even once, and then they go buy through somebody else, you might have a procuring cause. But let's protect ourselves anyways and get buyer agency contracts signed on every transaction. So what I feel is that the reason why many real estate agents don't like to get a buyer agency contract signed is because, unlike a listing presentation, like on a listing presentation, you set an appointment, you show up at a seller's house, you tour the property, you show them a great deal of value before you ask them to sign any type of contract. Typically with buyer agency, the way most real estate agents, I'm not saying everybody, the way most buyer agencies work is that they're not showing a great deal of value up front, because a call comes in from Zillow, buyer says, yeah, I want to go look at this property, and we immediately set up an appointment and we go show the property, and so it's really hard to show up and say, hey, I'm going to be your buyer agent, sign here. So in order to get those buyer agent contracts signed, you have to have another step in between. Instead of just showing up and just showing a person a property without any type of conversation in between, do a buyer consultation or a buyer presentation. I'll go through, we have a couple of them in our career den. One is called the LAER buyer presentation. One is the 7 Secrets presentation. The 7 Secrets presentation is for both buyers and sellers. But basically the gist of it is that if you have a buyer that calls you from Zillow, I want to go look at this property, you say, no problem, love to show you that property. We can go look at it Saturday at 10 o'clock. What I'd like to do first is let's meet at 9:30 at the Dunkin' Donuts that's a half mile down the street. Just want to, first of all, show you some other properties that you might be interested in the area as a hook so that they're interested. Also want to show you what I can offer you as your buyer agent. So you could still set up the appointment, but have that half-hour meeting beforehand where you demonstrate your value through a quick presentation. The PowerPoint presentations that we have are also, you can convert them to Keynote. So the way I look at it is to load it into your iPad or your computer and show up with your presentation and say, hey, I just have a quick presentation. I want you to know what I'm all about. I'm not your average real estate agent. And if you go through that presentation and show them the amount of value that you bring to the table, not going to be difficult at all at the end of the presentation to say that I really only work with people who are absolutely committed to working with me. I'm going to invest a great deal of time into finding you the home of your dreams, and I'm going to ask that you sign a buyer agency contract. We have different buyer agency contracts to choose from on our career den. We also have what's called a commitment, like a buyer commitment form, which is not even a buyer agency contract. It's like a really loose commitment that says, here's what I'm going to do for you, here's what I'd like for you to do for me. Not necessarily a contract, but at least you're getting somebody to sign their name to make a mental decision in their own head that they want to buy a property. So you can look at, on our career den, we have different buyer agency agreements. Just as a note, I know you guys have already gone through the classes on agency disclosure. This is totally different than an agency disclosure. Agency disclosure is required by law, and that's just letting the person know, like putting them on notice who you represent in a transaction. It is not committing them at all, nor you, to working with them. So some of the other things you'll find on our site, on Career Den, you'll find like a buying checklist. So just kind of like a consultation form when you're sitting with somebody to say, what are the wants and needs? What are the things you absolutely must have in your property? And what are the things you'd like to have in your property to try to narrow down their search. There's another form of the questionnaire. So we kind of throw everything on our career den so that you can pick and choose what you want to use. The other piece is that once you have a buyer, we have how many people here have a Boston Logic website? So on Boston Logic, you can put your leads in, or you can send them a link so people can register themselves to search for real estate. I can go through this after if you guys want assistance on seeing how to set up a lead in Boston Logic, but I'll also say that if you go on to Career Den, we've written a guide to Boston Logic, just step by step, and one of the sections is in there is how to add a lead to Boston Logic, so you can help them create what areas they want to search in, etc. All right, before I move into this, I want to download one of the presentations just so you can see a sample buyer presentation. Any questions so far?
I have a quick question.
Yes.
Do you feel like Boston Logic is, so I usually send my clients through Pinergy, through MLS, and you feel like Boston Logic is better?
I think they're similar. I think you could do either one.
Can I
Yes.
speak to that? Is with Boston Logic, when you log into the back side of it, you can actually see what they're clicking on that maybe they don't notify you, but you'll get a little update saying, oh, they looked at these 3 houses, and you can follow up the next day or later that day and say, hey, I don't know if you saw this listing, but I saw it, I thought of you right away, and they've already seen the listing, but it's a way to build rapport between you and them and
You
help
can
you
do
look.
that through Pinergy also.
Only on their matches though.
Right,
Yeah, you
only
see
on-
if they're
that's
eligible
true.
for
So if
That's
they,
true,
if
yeah.
they just go to your website, like, if they go to my Boston Logic site, it's branded to me, they do the search, but they can also get the neighborhood reports and everything. So there's things that are keep constantly bringing it back to you. One thing is we don't have the buyer match for listings. So in Pinergy, yes, on MLS Pin, you can go in, if you have a listing, you can not see who looked at it, but there's a code or ID associated with everybody. So you could reach out to those agents that have clients looking. We don't have that feature on Boston Logic, but I think there's a lot of other great features on Boston Logic's back end that we have that we don't utilize, that we could.
Don't you get leads through Boston Logic in terms of Facebook or something?
Yes. That's the biggest value to Boston Logic, that if you have a Boston Logic website for the price, which is $39 a month, in my opinion, you won't find a better value for $39 a month as far as what a website can offer to real estate agents. But also through our partnership with HomeSpotter, if you have a Boston Logic website, anytime you list a property, you'll get 5 days of Facebook advertising for that listing. So landing page for your listing is automatically created, and you'll get an email saying congratulations on your new listing, and then they do 5 days of advertising. So the average number of leads we get on that is about 27 leads per listing. So just based on that alone, that I think that if you have a Boston Logic website for $39 a month, even if you don't use any feature, that all you want is the leads on each listing you get, you will sell 1 house this year at least, because you had that feature.
Is that where the leads boost come from?
Yes, that's boosted.
It's a really
Those
easy
leads.
website to design too. I mean, we have it for the team, and even on the back side, then you get a CRM that goes with that.
I had it in, with another agency.
It's a great website.
Boston Logic.
we have our Homesparity website through Boston Logic. and
So
it's
what I'll say about it, if you've had it from other companies, it's only as good as the company. Like
Yeah,
it's a shell.
Yeah.
When we got the Boston Logic website, it was a complete shell. We had to write all of our own drip campaigns. So I feel like a big chunk of what it has to offer is because we created it. So I definitely
I
would
didn't
not.
have it personally.
Yeah.
I just was on like a team,
Yeah,
and I used it off. But
Yeah.
I didn't really use it like that. So that's what I was just wondering.
Oh, I have it too.
Yeah,
By the time I moved on.
I try not
Stacey,
to
can I
move.
go back one
Yes.
minute to the procuring cause?
What do you do in the event that you take out a buyer and they don't disclose that they were already looking at this particular home with another realtor and they've already been there twice, but they don't inform you of that, so you think it's the first time you're taking this buyer out and then you get hit with
Yeah. I think that if they've already looked at the property with somebody else, the only way you're gonna get paid, the only way that potentially you're gonna get paid is to get a buyer agency contract. So you go to them and say, you know what, you've already looked at this property, that means it's possible another real estate company is gonna be coming after the commission. So, I'm happy to represent you, and, cause there's still value.
If they deny they've seen the property, and people aren't always,
Yeah,
honest about that. So,
yes. So still, I mean, the way the Realtor Organization really looks at it is who introduced who brought the person into the
But
property.
there's something in the PNS too, like when people sign PNS, it says that buyer and seller have both acknowledged that this is the agent and the brokerage representing them, and if anybody else steps in and brings that commission fight to the table, that it will be outside of this transaction, they'll settle it
Yes.
outside,
Yes.
so.
Yeah, so like the one that I'm working on right now, that our agent showed the property twice, and then another agent came in. By the way, the reason the other agent came in is she found out from her work that she gets a reload perk, so she called that real estate agent to get a commission rebate on the deal. So she wanted that property, but she wanted a commission rebate, so she went through another agent to buy the property that we had already shown her twice. So I notified the listing agent. I said, I want to just put you on notice that we ask you not to pay out the commission. Whether they do that or not, it doesn't matter. We're going to go after we're going to file for arbitration. So we'll file for arbitration. It's a long process. That's the worst of it, is that it's a long process. Even if somebody is not a member of the Realtor Board, we can still go through the process. They have to agree to it. But I have another one going right now, because these cases, I'd say that, I don't know statistically, but I'd guess most of the mediation and arbitration issues with the boards are procuring cause. It's agents.
Wow.
Yeah.
Would that be the same thing? Like, I had a situation where I got a lead, brought her to the house, and she wanted to put an offer in. So I called the listing agent, I called her lender to get the approval, I went through all the steps, and then an agent and I didn't have him sign any agency agreement or anything, it was the first time we met, but she had gone to an open house a few weeks prior, and the agent there had put her on MLS Search. They had no contract, I made sure of it, they didn't sign anything, no contract, nothing. She didn't show her any homes. And that agent had called me because the lender wasn't answering my phone calls. So the lender called that agent and told her that this couple was putting in an offer with me. So the agent called and said, no, those are my clients. I put in an offer with them.
But you showed it.
Right.
Oh yeah. Then I would argue you're procuring cause. Make sure you get your agency signed, because that's one of the first things they ask if we're going through an arbitration or mediation, is show us that your real estate agent followed protocol, like gave an agency disclosure, because you could lose just on that. That's the agency, not a buyer agency contract, just the agency disclosure. But the fact that a client is on a MLS search with somebody means zero. Nothing. They could have even had a buyer agency contract with that person. That doesn't mean that you're not procuring cause. You brought them into the property and showed them.
Right, and the other agent had said that she had put in offers that got rejected, she was showing them the homes, and the client's like, I've never signed anything, we never put in any offers, she never showed me any homes, so the agent was lying to me.
I remember that, yeah.
Oh, I was so mad. I was
Stacey,
like,
can I
whatever,
add?
Yeah, go.
The actual law is the proximate. I just wanted to answer her as well. The actual law is the proximate cause. The actual law is the proximate cause. It's any activity that was initiated and from there continuously unbroken that causes a consummation of that transaction. That person is the the procuring cost, not that open house person. You were the procuring cost in that particular transaction. Because you started that, because if they, from the open house, had made an offer and all of that stuff, then you stepped in, then that's a no-no. But nothing had happened from that open house.
Yeah, no.
From your showing, from there, you submitted an offer, and from there, it continuously all the way to the closing, you were the procuring cause.
And remember what we talked about yesterday, what it goes back to, your database, your notes, keeping track of your emails, writing what you've done, keeping track of your texts, all of that is evidence of building the relationship with the client.
And not only that, because all of these procuring cost cases, they're very fact specific, so the more evidence that you can bring to court to show, or arbitration to show that these are all the things that you have done, therefore these are all of your activities that had resulted in this transaction, in this sales, you were the procuring cost. So save all communications.
Okay. Good to know.
I would have definitely fought on that one. I would have definitely gone after that.
That girl beat me up sometimes.
How long?
And it wasn't my brokerage,
Yeah.
so it would have to be through them.
Can I also, with regards to Susan's question about what if you don't know? In our code of ethics, the Realtor Code of Ethics, it specifically says we as buyer agents are obligated to ask as soon as possible, are you, don't ask working, because you'll get yes all the time. Say, have you signed a buyer agency agreement with another broker? If they say no, that's all you need. But if you don't ask that question, you're in violation of the Code of Ethics, and it's, my stance is, you shot yourself in the foot by not doing your job.
Could you also ask the agent, like the other agent, if she had, like she had told me she had a contract signed, could you ask her to send it to me so I could see it?
You can ask, I don't think it matters.
Yeah, it wouldn't
You showed the
matter.
property.
I mean, if the client's saying no and she's saying
But
yes.
I would caution, if there's something like that, be careful you don't get involved with broker interference. At that point, I would immediately go to Renee, who can go to Stacey to escalate it, because if you try to resolve it at that point, it could be
Yeah, I could get myself in
it
trouble.
could be broker interference, which is, again, we're dealing with Code of Ethics violation, and so.
And it would not matter. That's why I would definitely have gone after that. I would, if I were you, I would have closed out the deal and collected a commission. They could file for arbitration, but even if there were a buyer agency contract between them and the other person, that is between, the buyer might have to go pay them a commission as well. But if, as procuring cause, you were due
Right.
compensation on that. Did they buy that property?
No.
Oh. So typically, what I'll say is usually it is not, I'd say in most of the instances, it is not the fault of either real estate agent. It is a consumer who is confused or in a rush or just wanted to buy a property and didn't care what the repercussions were. So they end up going crazy and buying the property. So this here is just a sample buyer agency presentation. This is on our Career Den under presentations. There's also the 7 Secrets presentation, but basically the whole idea of it is that instead of just rushing out to show somebody property, set up an appointment beforehand, even if it's a half hour at a Dunkin' Donuts down the street, so you get to see the person and show your value. Because if you have that, it's just like doing a listing presentation, that at the end of a listing presentation, you don't say, all right, I'm going to try to sell your house. You don't have to sign anything. Don't worry about it. Feel free to talk to whomever you want. At the end of the buyer presentation, you've shown a great deal of value, and in my opinion, you will stand out beyond any real estate agent they've met with, because probably their experience is what I talked about earlier. that in the past they called other real estate agents, and the real estate agent showed up at their beck and call to show them a property, showing zero value, just being a door opener. You're going way beyond being a door opener here to say, here's what I'm going to do for you. So it just talks about how you want to be a partner to them and what you're going to do to help them in their transaction. Next, yep.
We have a question from the live.
Yes.
They said, how about if a buyer fires a realtor who has shown them a few houses, and then the buyer goes back and makes an offer on a house you've shown them after they fired you?
I'd still say you have a procuring cause issue. So the question is, they had a buyer agency contract?
They didn't mention.
Oh, so let's say you show a property, you have a buyer agency contract, then the people say we don't want to work with you. Still doesn't mean it's the procuring cause is the person who introduced the property with proximate cause with an unbroken chain. So I don't know, I guess there'd be a lot of questions like how much time went in between and what other circumstances happened in between. But I'd still say that procuring cause is who caused the person to make an offer on the property. But the other piece I'll say is my thought process in general is when an agent feels upset because they've spent a great deal of time, showed a property, etc. If you come to me and I say to you, I don't think you have a case, and you say, I really think I do have a case, I will absolutely file for arbitration on it. Because what I will say, and one of the ones I did recently was just that circumstance. I said to the agent, I don't think you're procuring cause.
I want to add to that as well.
Yes.
There's also the theory of abandonment to answer that live question. If you, as a real estate agent, literally abandon your client, then yeah, you're no longer the procuring cause because you have broken that chain. You have intentionally broken that, so that's your action. But if someone fires you after you've shown them the property and either submitted an offer or not, you are still the procuring cause. Yeah.
So my experience with doing the mediation and the procuring cause stuff is that basically the process is that you have to pay $500. I believe both sides have to pay $500 in order to submit for arbitration. And you have to submit a story of what happened and any documented proof. That goes to a grievance committee at the board, and they quickly go through it and say, yeah, there could be a question of procuring cause. We'll move this to the next step, which is a mediation hearing. My experience, I've never had anything in 20 years go to an actual arbitration. It is almost always handled at a mediation. So at a mediation, they have a mediator, a professional mediator come in. Both sides go to the table, both sides say their piece of the story, then the mediator breaks you up into separate rooms, talks to you separately, and almost always there's a compromise. So one side says, you know what, I'll pay a referral fee or whatever. So that's why I always say, even if I feel like you might not have a strong case, if you are very passionate about it and you want to go for it, I will back any of our real estate agents and go for procuring cause or go file for arbitration to let a mediator. Sometimes the best thing to do is just let an independent third party hear both sides of the story. On the one that I didn't feel we had a case, that one went to mediation recently, and so we had a buyer agency contract. We did not have, I feel we did not have procuring cause. So I said to the agent, it might be best to go sue the buyer, because that I know we'll win. We will sue the buyer. By the way, if you have to sue a buyer, and I don't know if you'd agree with this, I always say to agents, I prefer to do small claims court because it's just fast and easy and inexpensive. The maximum you can go for in small claims court is $7,500. So on this particular one, it was a $10,000 commission. I said, let's just go sue the people in small claims court. You'll win, it'll be fast, we'll get into court in the next 3 months. They'll hear both sides. I think you'll win. You have a contract saying they've agreed to pay you. And the agent was adamant that she did not want to do that because she didn't feel the buyers would have the money, which is definitely something to think about, because we have one small claims situations, and if the person can show the court they don't have the money, basically it can get pushed off for a very long time that you actually collect anything. So she wanted to go after the other real estate company. So we went to a mediation and we walked out with half the commission. So you never know. So on the presentation, this is just a sample buyer presentation. One thing I always say, whether you are on a team or not on a team, always sell yourself as a team, that it's more than just you working on the transaction. Every single individual real estate agent has a team of people you work with. You have your mortgage guy, you have your attorney that you believe in, you have your staff at the office. So talk about the power of working with a team. Like Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, you get way more than just me on this transaction. You get a vetted group of people who can help you buy this property. I mean, we all know that there's a million things that can go wrong when trying to buy a house. I'm going to make sure you don't go to the loan officer who's going to tell you anything. I'm going to make sure you go to somebody that's going to tell you the truth and be transparent about what you can do. I'm going to give you an awesome legal team that can answer any questions throughout the process. We then talk about the power of our company. That we do 10,000. Now we've done about 13,000 transactions, so this needs to be updated. We then talk about what it means to work with a realtor. This presentation, first of all, is all, you can modify any of it and customize it. It's meant to be customized. We just kind of throw in what we feel your value proposition is already. It talks about what it means to work with a realtor and having the code of ethics behind you. As opposed to non-realtors, which we see out there. In fact, one of our procuring cause issues right now is with a non-realtor, but they agreed to mediation through the board. So we talk about why work with a realtor, then we go into what our objective is. Together, I want to help you find your ideal home at the best price, shortest amount of time, with great terms, with as little hassle as possible. We talk about how we're partners in the home buying process to find you the right property. Communication and cooperation ensure a successful transaction. What your objective is, that you're going to listen to them, explain agency, explain the home search and purchase process, help in the loan approval process, search for homes, meet with them, provide information evaluating homes for sales, prepare an offer to purchase, review what happens from time of contract through closing. I think in this presentation, in this section, it's not a bad idea to show them a sample offer, a sample purchase and sale agreement. And like I said the other day, I think that if the people are looking at older homes, now's a good time to also just talk about lead paint instead of waiting until they find a property. Then you go through the buyer consultation form. These forms are on our site. The reason, I don't know why this is not, maybe because it's in Google. It looks like the formatting's off a little bit. I think it's because it might have opened in Google. Then you talk about the importance of a pre-approval to get a property under agreement. Things that they need to think about when it comes to pre-approval, the down payment, their ability to pay. Just because they can qualify for a particular amount doesn't mean that they can necessarily afford it. They want to make sure they're comfortable with the payments, what the closing costs are, how is their credit. Then you talk about how the mortgage companies look at it. Basically, the mortgage companies try to keep their total mortgage payment somewhere between 25 and 30% of their gross income, and their total debt, I'd say 38 to 40%, meaning their mortgage payment plus all of their other. Do you guys know how to qualify somebody for a mortgage? We should have a class on that, because it's really, I'm helping somebody with a short sale. Quick side note, I got referred somebody that needs a short sale negotiator, so I had a great call with the seller of a property who is in foreclosure yesterday. and I was talking to them about what their options are, that this property, a foreclosure notice has been sent out. They're gonna lose the property most likely in the next 6 months. Wanted to know if he could do a loan modification. I said we could try a loan modification, but he's not working. So I said usually they want to see that you have income coming in to do a loan modification, so I think it's going to be difficult. So I go through what it means to do a short sale, and then he's like, I have a cousin that might want to buy the property. So last night I called the cousin, and I spoke to the cousin for 20 minutes. And from my mortgage background, I'm like, how long have you been at your job? What do you think your credit score is? Are your bills paid on time every month? What's your income? And I was able to, like in 10 minutes, quickly qualify him for a mortgage. Definitely I handed him off to a Ross mortgage person right away to make sure. But I'm like, oh, what if, and then I found out what he is paying now. I said, what happens if you could buy a property? So in that short amount of time, we basically got a buyer. He's like, I don't want that 2-family in Worcester, but if you think I can buy, I'll go, I want to buy something else. Definitely worth learning how to qualify somebody, because it's great to talk about in your initial consultation, and you learn little tricks. Like for example, now, this time of year, we have all kinds of people getting tax refunds. Tax refunds is totally fine for a down payment on a house. It's not considered a gift. If they get a $5,000 tax refund, they can deposit it and use it as a down payment initial, like right away. So good to learn how to qualify. Then we go through, we tell the buyer, hey, there's all these things you should not do. I always tell our loan officers to make sure they go through this stuff. You say, I want to let you know that there are a bunch of things that will screw up your closing. Do not, until after you buy a house, do not buy a car or a truck. Do not decide you're going to change banks. Do not go out and buy furniture, even if the place is telling you there's no payments for a while because you are taking on debt. Do not spend money. Do not change jobs. I mean, deals fall apart every single day because of these reasons. So let your buyer know that you want to help them make sure that they don't screw up their own deal. Then talk about how to look for a great property. Have them say, you know what, once we narrow down some properties, go out and scout the neighborhood, decide if it's a neighborhood that you feel like you want to be in. You're telling them things they should look for, like if they need to be close to a highway, tell them to go take a drive from the house to their work, make sure that they're comfortable. Yeah. Interestingly, because I live in a house, I bought a house in Littleton 5 years ago, and now I'm used to it, I don't even notice it, but it was like really quick. I saw the house online, I'm like, oh my God, this is the house I've wanted. It was a 1-year-old colonial, and I've had bad luck with new construction in my lifetime when I was much younger, and I said I'll never buy a new house again. And this house was 1 year old, so I wouldn't have to deal with the builder. And the first night I was in the house, all by myself and my daughter, and I heard, like, laying there was this crazy loud sound. Turns out I got train tracks in the backyard. No idea. I'm like, never occurred to me that there might be a train running through Littleton. Now I never notice it. Yeah. So, but
relaxing, right?
yeah, it doesn't totally doesn't bother me.
It's like living in Lowell. You just hear all like the fire sirens and stuff all the time. Eventually, it's just like normal.
Yes.
It's fine.
But it's funny because as real estate agents, it's a way to like shine, like to say to your buyer, by the way, go spend a little bit of time by the property because there could be train tracks in the backyard that you don't really. And I have like there's like a foundry that they do blasting once a week, so figure it out eventually. You can talk to them about school reports. We have some great links on our Career Den where you can go in and run a school report for somebody. So talk about, say, hey, do you have kids that are going into the schools? Do you need me to run school reports on any of the properties? Open houses. This is really important. So, yes.
Okay to ask about the kids?
I would say, I think it's fine that you ask if they want school reports. Yeah, I get what you're saying, that you got to be careful with fair housing, that you don't want somebody to feel discriminated against. But if you know somebody's got kids, like, you can word it, does do the schools matter to you? Do you need me to run reports, and which schools do you need me to run reports on? Open houses. This is really important, because if you take this extra step, which is a 20-minute presentation, you could talk to them and say, you know what, when I'm working with you, you're gonna feel like on a Saturday or Sunday you're driving around and you see an open house. We want to make sure that you understand that if you go into an open house, you want to let that real estate agent know that you are represented. Cool thing that we have on our Career Den is they're called open house passes. So they are printed on postcard stock. It's a big thing across that says open house pass, and you print out a bunch for your customer. And basically you say to them, this is the pass that you need to give to any real estate agent when you go into an open house. So the reason for that is because we always say, oh, just give them my business card. Your people do not remember that they're supposed to do that when they go to an open house. But if they have a pack of 20 open house passes, they know the purpose of those is that if I go to an open house, I must give my open house pass. So it's just protecting you.
How often do they use that? If you give them the passes, do they really use them? Do you find?
I think some people
Yeah.
definitely do use them because they get it. They
Yeah.
they know the purpose.
Yeah,
Instead
okay.
of giving them 10 cards, they're like,
Yeah.
why did he give me 10 cards again?
Yeah, because the pass is another commitment.
Yes.
On Career Den?
Yes, they're on the Career Den.
And then they can include the property that they went to as an open house, like just write it down on the pad or somewhere so they have a record, and then you would
Yeah.
know that which ones they went
Yeah,
to see.
not a bad idea.
Yeah.
Kiki swears by them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Keisha uses them on whenever she's working with a buyer.
I do the business card thing.
Yeah.
So that's even better, because then you're not wasting your business cards.
Right.
Either. They're just collecting dust in someone's drawer.
Right.
And forgetting them.
Then you tell them to take notes on each property. You talk about offers and contracts and what they mean. Talk about important dates that they have to be made aware of, what a home inspection is. Again, this is such a great opportunity for you guys to get them ready for a home inspection. To say, you know what, one of the things that you want to do is we'll probably do a home inspection on any property that you end up buying. I'm going to let you know right now that every single house has home inspection issues. The purpose of the home inspection is just so you know going in that there might be stuff that you need to be aware of down the road on the property, that someday you're going to have to replace the roof. But just because a home inspector brings up issues doesn't mean that it's a non-purchasable property. So this is the whole thing. There's no such thing as a failed home inspection.
Oh, I hear that all the time.
So let people know there is no such thing as a failed home inspection.
That's true, yeah.
Yes.
Study hard.
Or at least get above 65.
And then basically what's after the home inspection, you can discuss home warranties if that's something that some of our agents do it, some don't do it. If you don't do it, you can just delete this whole section out. Talk about what it means to go to the closing. And then there's like a moving checklist. So this is all about making it your own. You could say, you know what, if you have kids, some of the things that you want to think about with your kids is visiting the new schools if they're moving to a new district, things like that. Then we talk about in the presentation, by the way, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, I don't know if you've gone out and looked at any properties with a real estate agent yet, but this is what most agents do. They show up and they are door openers. They take you in and out of the property. But with me, we have a system in place that we're going to go out and find you the home of your dreams. What most agents do is you tell them what you're looking for. They'll look in MLS. They'll show you homes within your stated price range, starting with homes listed by them in their office. They'll write an offer on the, quote, best home they have shown you and present your offer to the listing agent. What I do that makes me different is I show homes currently listed for sale in the MLS. I'll go out and look for sale by owners, new construction. I'll do special marketing campaign by me for you. I'll show you any home. If you have a friend or family member that's thinking of selling their house, I can represent you on that as well. if nobody has seen it today, go on to the LAER Coming Soon Facebook page. I did one of our featured agent Friday videos with Nancy Rogers, who is a phenomenal high producing real estate agent out of Chelmsford. And it's just a 2-minute segment about how she had a buyer who was looking for a very particular type of property in Billerica. She showed them all the properties that fit that criteria in Billerica. None of them worked. So they said, we really want to be in the buyer gave a bunch of streets that they really want to be on and the kind of house they wanted. So Nancy took a picture of the couple, wrote a nice send out card, put their picture in the card, wrote a little story about who they were, why they want to be in this area of Billerica, and sent that out to a whole bunch of neighborhoods in Billerica. A woman called, said, I got your card. I have somebody, I definitely want to sell my property, and Nancy sold them that property. So don't stick to just MLS.
Yeah.
So you let them know, you know what, we might not find what you're looking for in MLS, but I've got a system in place that I'll go out and find the house that you're looking for. So you talk about your campaign strategy, your pledge to them, you'll counsel them, facilitate the loan approval process, search for their ideal home. Another thing that you can offer is, say, one thing that makes me different is once you decide on a particular property, I'm going to do a market analysis on the property you're buying, which is unusual. Most buyer agents don't do that, but it's one extra step to do a full CMA for your buyer. Write an offer and negotiate to get you the best deal. Handle details during the transaction, troubleshoot problems, provide you with a list of service providers in your neighborhood. What my marketing campaign is to find you the right property. I'll talk with top listing agents in the area, direct marketing if we need to, buyer flyers, buyer seeking property section on my website, but that you'll be working together as a team. You could talk about how you get compensated. So you don't have to necessarily stick to get paid exactly what is offered in MLS. You can decide what your value is and build that into your buyer contract. And then you explain to them that in most instances, much of the compensation is going to come from the listing agent. And then you can decide what's going to happen if the listing agent is not offering to compensate the full amount. You could waive the difference, or you can ask the people to write a check. I believe it can also be built into closing costs. Is that true? Buyer closing costs?
It's built into buyer's closing costs.
Yes.
They can't write a check at closing because it has to be on the the financial disclosure.
Yes.
So
It'll be on the HUD. Yes, correct. But it can be built into the closing costs that are paid by the seller as well.
right, correct. And there's an actual clause that NAR has that we can use. If I think I started to tell the story the other day, but there's some other people here. So in New Hampshire, it's a 2-line sentence that basically says, we refuse, or the buyer refuses the compensation in the MLS for the buyer's agent, period. Then the second sentence says, seller to contribute X% to the buyer to compensate their agent. Because the contract, the purchase and sale or the offer is between the seller and the buyer. We as agents on either side don't have any play in it, so they're not paying us, they're paying them. But this agent only put in, they refused the compensation and forgot to put in the other part. So there was no compensation for the buyer's agent at closing.
I was crying myself to sleep.
Yeah, I will get that terminology on Monday when we go Code of Ethics. But in Code of Ethics, it's Article 1-13, Standard of Practice. It talks about in Part 2 of that, the amount of compensation is to be paid by the client, and that you have to tell them, hey, look, if this is a 2% listing and we have a 3% buyer agency agreement, that means that 1% is different. And as I said the other day, you have the choice. You can, you don't have the choice. The client has a choice. You're talking to them. You have the choice. I'm going to show you, if you say you want to go look at 123 Main Street, I'm going to show you the MLS sheet and what the compensation being offered, and it's your choice whether we go see it or not. You as an agent can't make that decision. The buyer does. Also, under Standard of Practice Article 3 is where it says, it's in Standard Practice 3-1, it says that unless especially indicated in the offers to cooperate, cooperating brokers may not assume that the offer of compensation exists. So, like I mentioned, if you're in New Hampshire, there's an agent out of Amherst that on their listings are putting $1. The only rule that MLS PIN has and NARIN has is that something has to be offered. They can offer you $1. There is nothing unethical about that, okay? There are states where there's already buyer's agents getting paid by buyers, seller agents getting paid by sellers, with the exception being the VA. But that's another, going back to why the buyer agency agreement's important. That's what's gonna dictate what you're getting paid. And, go ahead.
Do you think that will start being a thing? Buyers paying buyers, agents, sellers paying?
I absolutely do.
I feel like it should be.
It would make things a lot cleaner.
Isn't that how it was a long time ago?
No, it was the sellers paid.
Sellers
And there
paid
was only
everything.
sellers agents basically for a very
Right,
long
maybe
time.
that's what it was.
Yeah.
Because buyer agency didn't come until what, 1992?
92,
Yeah.
93 was when it started to take off, so, right. So I think, I mean, there's areas in Florida where this is very commonplace, and I think that the future, especially with the way technology is moving, we're gonna have that type of transaction where it's not gonna be uncommon to see nothing being offered once the MLS has changed that real quick.
Now, how do you think that's gonna affect when a buyer is like strapped for cash, is like a first-time home buyer or something? Now they're paying that commission, like, I've seen like people that are uneducated, they're like, oh, well, I don't wanna pay you to help me buy my house, I can do it. And it's like, well, if you knew, when you talk to somebody, you know that it comes from the selling side. But now it's, if I have to start having that conversation, where are they now coming up with this $5,000 or whatever the commission may be when they're already strapped for a down
Yeah,
payment?
you can build it into
Right.
closing costs. So for example, it's not uncommon to say that the seller agrees to pay up to $10,000 of buyer's closing costs and prepaids, including buyer agent. We have agents that do it all the time.
Right.
So that,
It
that's
can
just
still
kind
be
of the
done
talk
that way.
Yeah.
That's just the talk you would kind of have to
Yes.
have is, we're gonna somehow figure out how to wrap this into financials
Yes.
on either
So-
side.
And I'm sorry to hijack you here, Stacy, for
No,
a second.
go.
So the other thing there is, if they come in and they say, look, I'm pre-approved for 300,000, okay, then we probably have to look at homes that are in the 285 to 290 price point to be able to compensate and adjust. The other thing is Article 7 of our Code of Ethics. Nobody likes me after I say this. Article 7 of our Code of Ethics says that if you are being compensated by more than one party, you have to disclose it to all parties. If you're a seller's agent, you're getting paid by the seller, right? That's why they don't have to disclose if they're getting 4% and they're giving you 3% or 2%, because they're only getting paid by one person. As a buyer's agent, if you're getting a 3% buyer agency fee, and you turn around and the seller's agent's only offering you 2, you have to disclose to your buyer and you have to disclose to your seller or their seller through their agent that, hey, just so you know, on the Alta statement, on the CD, on the HUD, whatever you prefer to call it, on that statement, you're gonna see that there is an additional compensation line on the buyer side paying the buyer's agent. Okay? And I think as this whole thing progresses, so that Article 7 came out in 1993, which was right around the time of the buyer agency. Remember I told you everybody thought that was gonna ruin the industry? So that's what it was. Now sellers agents wanted to know, well, how much are they getting paid? That's where that comes in, okay?
What I would say is we have agents in our company that get a much higher buyer agency fee than what is typically offered in MLS because they go through this presentation in advance and they show a great deal of value because in my opinion there is definitely a huge spectrum of service that real estate agents provide. There are agents that do very little work and deserve less than other agents who do a great deal of negotiating and marketing and legwork to go find somebody a property. And so if you disclose it properly, many buyers have no problem paying an extra amount, wrapping it into closing costs, or even coming up with an extra 0.5% at closing to know that they have hired great assistance in getting the transaction. And I'll say that, and I talk about it in the 7 Secrets book as well, that I have seen instances where buyers will go work with a deep discount agency because they want to save, they want to get a refund of their commission, and you can see that that agent absolutely, the example I share in the book is during the last market downturn. It was a property that had been sitting on the market. It was our listing, and the buyer wanted to work with a real estate company that offers deep discounts. Basically, they'll get half their commission back if they buy the property. So they went and got representation from that company simply so that they could get their commission. And it was during a time period when properties were sitting on the market for an average of 6 months to a year, and they came in with a full price offer on the property. And even the listing agent was like, who puts a full price offer in on a house that's been sitting on the market for 6 months? And it was because that agent didn't really educate the buyer. And it's like, hey, you want to get the property, pay what they're asking for it. So yeah, did the agent or did the consumer walk away with, I don't know, $4 or $5 grand out of their pocket that they saved in a real estate commission? Probably. But did they probably pay an extra $30,000 for the property because they didn't find somebody that was really representing them?
So they felt that.
Yes, yes.
Because they think they're winning.
They're in
because
control.
it's presented
Yeah.
to them in a certain way.
But that's how you do your presentations and share stories and say, you know what, this company's out there that'll totally pay you a piece of the commission back. Doesn't mean you're saving anything. In fact, it's probably costing you money.
And Stacey, real
Yep.
quick, a huge transition that's going on, but it's not anything new. It's just got a new title, but you're gonna see iBuyer and La Macchia just set up a thing. There's nothing new about this system of being able to log onto a portal and putting in an offer and doing it all on your own. It's basically a for sale by owner, but it's on the other side where you can buy by yourself. All they're doing is cutting out the buyer agent. They're not getting any representation. So if they come to you and they say, well, I saw on TV, La Macchia says I can just log into this portal and it's not, you know, it's gonna give me a better deal. You have to be prepared and know what's going on. So Inman just did an article on, am I saying it right?
Yeah.
La Macchia. Caldwell Banker just bought iBuyer. KW's coming out with the same thing. Zillow is in Texas piloting the program. So be aware of what's out there so that you know what your value proposition is over what their lame thing is. And if you want that, you can do it as a listing agent. It's called Realtor Commander, and Jill uses it. The short
CRM,
sales.
yeah.
The CRM. They actually have in their CRM a portal that gives you a website where if somebody sees, put that out there, if somebody sees it, they can go and submit an offer online. That's all they're doing is people are just submitting random offers. It's no different.
They don't go look at the property, they just.
They can, but
They need
Right,
yeah,
and
it's
you get,
weird.
but then you need
Yeah,
a
who's
procuring
showing them?
cause.
so
Who shows?
I'm just
Well, and who does that benefit though, that besides the
La
consumer?
Macchia, it doesn't benefit the consumer. I do not believe it benefits the consumer one bit.
The consumer could say, well, it benefits me, I'm cutting out the middleman of a buyer's agent and, you know, whatever, if that's how they feel, but what does La Macchia gain from doing that? if
An
they're
extra
not-
3% or an
What if
extra
they're not-
2%.
So it can only be put in on their listings? Is that how it
Yeah.
works? Or can it be put on any house that's out there?
Just to who's living.
No,
Yeah.
on their list.
double in.
Oh, so
Yeah.
that's why I'm like, how does that benefit? them?
Right.
So if it's only locked into your
Right,
listings, I
so
can see
basically
that.
you're getting, basically what you're saying is going back to 30 years ago,
With some
that
agents.
I will have no agent represent me.
Yeah.
So it's, I think that The reason why our industry has not been Uberized is because real estate agents do bring a great deal of value to the transaction, especially as a middleman. Like, and I'll even say it on my own deals, like having sold my own real estate in the past, when you're doing your own transaction, you're your own worst enemy. You overprice your own real estate. You do not negotiate on your best behalf. Like, you need somebody that is in the middle of the transaction for you. Yeah.
So I think Stacey's going to talk about how to hire a lion. In chapter 1, Stacey talks about the full value agent. It's going to become more and more important that you know your value proposition and you know how you differentiate yourself from the other 20 brokers that are out there doing the exact same thing in the same town as you. This is one example of understand how to represent to your buyer client what the value of having an agent follow you through, because most of the time they don't have an idea at all of what's involved in the complete transaction and all of the advice and counseling that you can do for them. So this only adds to your value to them from the beginning.
Then this presentation just goes into what your commitment is. Like, here's all the things that I'm going to do for you. And then you talk about you. So this is where you customize it to yourself. Get them onto the LAER app, get them onto
Stacey,
a drip campaign.
can you go back 2 slides to the about you? One more, I'm sorry. There we go, right there. All right, so the very last bullet. How many people in here have a second job? Okay.
I teach college.
I guarantee you, whether you have a second job or not, you probably put enough hours in real estate to consider this a full-time career.
Yeah.
So you can say you're a full-time agent even if you have another job, because you're going to put in the hours. Okay? I'm sorry, I just wanted to highlight that. Sometimes people get stuck on it.
And then you talk about what the next steps are. So next step, we're going to go through a commitment process to so that I could start working with you, and finalize your search criteria, and then start searching for real estate. That's basically the end of the presentation. But the whole idea of this is that you have a presentation, that a call comes in off Zillow, you're not just dropping everything and showing up and showing somebody a house, because that's when people don't see your value. That's when people will say, oh, if I want to go look at a different house, I'll just call a different real estate agent, because by doing things like that, you become the average real estate agent. Mm-hmm. But if you take the extra step, say, I'll meet you a half an hour beforehand, I get a quick presentation for you, and I will show you what makes me different than most real estate agents. It's so easy. It is so natural to have somebody sign a buyer agent contract, just like on a listing presentation. You don't think twice about at the end of a listing presentation saying, okay, here's the contract, it's going to be whatever for 6 months or a year, whatever you do. You don't think twice about it. So for real estate agents, it is my opinion that the buyer agency contract is just a mental block in your own head. It's not in the client's head. Most clients would not even think twice about signing it, even if they didn't know what it was. But if it makes it easier for you to get that buyer agent contract signed, then here's a nice presentation to say, hey, this is all the awesome stuff I'm going to do for you. I need you to commit to me, and I'm going to commit to you because of all this stuff that I'm going to do on the transaction. Mm-hmm. And then have them sign there.
You're right, Stacey, everybody's our own worst enemy.
Yes.
We have, they won't sign it.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's like the whole, like, you're like, oh, they're going to yell at me if I call them on the phone. It's like the whole phone mentality.
Yes.
Like, you make that first call, you get over it, and every call from that gets easier.
Yes. Mm-hmm. By the way, this is a good place to plug my Saturday morning class. Change your mind, change your life. It is a 5-week program. It starts tomorrow. Everybody should have received an invitation to it. I'm going to put it on Facebook today. I have about 80 people registered for it, so it's every Saturday morning for the next 5 weeks. It's at 7 a.m. And basically it's all on. What I always say to real estate agents is that if you are not meeting your goals, it's a mental block. It's not about, you don't have to go out and buy another lead program. You don't have to go take another business planning class, because typically what we see in this business is that agents year after year, for the most part, do the same amount of business within like 10%. So that means if you're a $100,000 agent, you're going to be roughly a $100,000 agent year in and year out, unless you do something different in your head. So basically this 5-week class is we help you break through to figure out what you have to do to become a new you in your own head, because you will always live up to the person you believe yourself to be in your own head. So we start working on the mental piece of it, because that's where I've spent so much time. First of all, I read 1 million books. I see you have a Wayne Dyer book. He's one of my favorite. Oh my God.
I love it.
Wayne Dyer. Yeah, Wayne Dyer changed my life.
Really?
Just reading his books, and I still do. If I have a bad day, he has what's called the meditation, and I will go to my car and I'll sit in the car and do his meditation.
Let me just give you a.
Yes.
Look at that.
I've been. This is like 10, 11 years old.
Which book is that?
This is Excuses Begun.
Okay.
Because I'm coming into real estate.
Yes.
I gotta get Wayne out.
Yes. I'll definitely reference him in the 5-week class.
Great.
But you gotta break through like the mental limits, because what's really interesting, not only have I read like books like Wayne Dyer, Psycho-Cybernetics is a great one, Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself by Joe Dispenza, unbelievable book. But also I've studied real estate agents who, we have real estate agents in our company who year after year do like 50, make 50,000, 75,000. Oh, yeah, I happen to be carrying the book with me. I have examples of agents that were making $50,000 or $75,000 a year for like a decade, and then all of a sudden they become a $40 million agent, and then for the next decade they stick at a $40 million agent. So like what happened that they went, it wasn't that they went out and bought Zillow, and it wasn't that they decided to do a buyer presentation that they never used to do. It was something that they overcame mentally in their own head, and once you do it, it'll change your business and your life forever. So
the future terrifies you and the past haunts you.
Yes. 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 So if you're available, it's every Saturday morning. I am recording the series as well, so if you can't make it on for the live webinar, it'll all get recorded and we're going to put it on LAER University. So my goal out of it is, right now we have around 80 people that are registered for it, and I know that there's going to be some people in that whether it be this year or next year, whenever, you're going to eventually have a mental breakthrough where everything is going to change overnight, literally overnight. Your business and your life is going to change.
So it's 7 to what?
It's just an hour, 7 to 8. Yeah, I did Saturday mornings because I'm like, what's the one time a week that nobody will have an excuse as to something they have to do?
I'm the Y from 6 to 7:30 Saturday. I'm dead serious.
Yes.
The last 11 years. So
Oh my God, that's awesome. Yes.
My
well,
kids
the
have
weekdays
hockey.
they're fine.
Huh?
7
Oh, see?
a.m.
I
on
didn't think of
Saturday.
hockey.
I think I might skip it though, 'cause
Yeah.
I really wanna see this class.
Well, it's getting recorded too.
Practice, so.
Yeah. So that's it. Hong, I'm going to have you talk for a little bit about Procuring Cause. Is that good? Do you have a presentation or just chatting?
I'm just gonna chat. I
Here, you can
have
sit
just
here so people
a
can
page of
see you.
notes.
Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Hong Tran. I'm a real estate attorney. Primarily we do real estate closings. Yeah. And I was asked by Stacey, the group, to come here to discuss Procuring Cause. And we've hammered this a little bit, so my, I don't even want to call it a presentation, my spiel is just going to be probably 5-10 minutes because we've discussed this. But first, I just wanted to discuss what the actual definition of procuring cause is. And that is the proximate or the originating cause that causes a series of events without breaking, like I've mentioned earlier, to accomplish that particular result, which is the closing. So what proximate is any natural or continuous event from that start. Remember when we discussed it earlier, from that start when there's nothing breaking, so the prior open house that client went to, nothing came out of that until you went and showed that property to that particular client. If that client had purchased that property through your showing, then you would have been that procuring or approximate cause. The list below are the situations how procuring cause issues come up. When an agent refers a prospective buyer to a property and does not accompany the prospect to the property. So let's not do that, right? So let's always accompany our clients to or our customers to the property. The agent not having authority to show the property. So always, always, always have some kind of a scheduling or some kind of a third-party confirmation from the listing agent that they're okay with you showing this property. Get some kind of confirmation, whether it's an email from that agent or from a third-party source, which is showing time, etc. Okay. An agent has not followed through, resulting in abandonment of a prospective buyer. We've discussed this earlier. If it's not your doing that cuts the chain of the proximate cause, then you are still the proximate cause. But if it's you who is the person that's abandoning the client, then obviously you cannot be the proximate cause, right? And there's also situations where the agent only introduces the buyer to the seller. These are situations where proximate cause issues will come up. I say proximate because it's very similar to procuring cause. And the last that I have is listing agent showing property to prospective buyer. Then the buyer engages another buyer agent to complete the transaction. So I'm just gonna, since we've discussed the issues already, I'm just gonna read some of the court opinions just so that you guys can see how the court decides on this. As I've discussed earlier, it's very fact-based. So the more evidence that you have going into these issues, the better it is for you to prove that you are the proximate cause. So this is from Mohammed and Robin. This is a situation where the buyer agent introduced to the Department of Transportation or something similar to that of a piece of property for them to buy. And throughout this entire process, it takes a long time for the department to answer and get an offer out. So throughout this delay in the process, the contract has run out. And so the seller ended up selling to that particular agency. And the court had ruled that the delay is not so unreasonable. So therefore, the agent is the proximate or the procuring cause, and therefore deserves that commission. I also have from Clark and Ellsworth, cause originating a series of events which, without break or continuity, result in the accomplishment of the object of the employment. So producing a purchaser who's ready, willing, and able to buy, I mean, that's from Real Estate 101. As long as you can show that, and having showed the agent, or I mean, having showed the prospective buyer that property, you are the procuring cause to that transaction. And also, let me see, the court in Riskin in Baltimore ruled that previous negotiation between a vendor and a purchaser, so the seller and the buyer, does not necessarily deprive the broker of his commission if his effort is the procuring case in the sale. Very similar to what you've discussed earlier, where the buyer went to an open house. Whether there is any discussions or not, that has stopped. So this court has ruled that whenever that buyer is activated again, and because of your action, this comes to fruition or the consummation of the transaction, you are the procuring cause.
Can I share a story?
Yes.
So about a year and a half ago, I had an agent on the team who, we actually had a case that we brought to the board, and we lost, but I'll share the experience just so you can all. It was a situation where the agent was working with a Zillow lead, had shown them maybe 3 or 4 properties. signed the mass mandatory but did not have a buyer's agency contract. And they said to her, we're gonna go check out this new construction development in Tingsboro. And she said, okay, let me know how you like it. And so they went, they met with the seller's agent, who spent probably a good hour, maybe even longer with them. They came back, texted our agent and said, we loved it, we want to make an offer. Our agent contacted the list agent, who hung up on her, and
It's not a good way to start.
I was in the office with her at the time. I said, call him right back. And he said, no, this is not gonna happen. I spent time with these people. And so I was just texting the client, and the client said, no, we told him we had an agent. And basically, he hung up on us again and called the buyer and said, if you work with me, I will give you a 2.5% reduction. So they, the buyer basically said, with this money, we can get that upgraded stove or whatever. They ultimately went with the agent, with the seller's agent. I was so livid, I said, no, that's not gonna happen. That's fine that happened that way, but I called the board, and the board said, it sounds like you definitely have a case. So they made me go through the code of ethics. I had to cite each violation. After reading our full complaint, they actually added additional violations. We go to the hearing. He had an attorney. We just went ourselves. And the question and answer dialogue was really amazing to sit there. I felt like so privileged just to be able to sit in front of a group of people and air my grievance, right? Even though, he's literally right here. And they found that he did not violate, although they did say, how did the buyer know to ask for a 2.5% credit? That's suspect right there. They really, they did hammer him on certain things. They were very, I think they knew really how it played out, but because we did not call, we didn't know exactly where the buyer was going. We knew they had some interest in the area, but we did not set up an appointment, even an unaccompanied appointment. We didn't say, hey, our buyer's coming. So that was one thing we could have done. But we did cite that, we were sort of shut down. He would not recognize our relationship. And that was a huge issue, but ultimately we did not, we did not collect our compensation because we felt we were shut down from providing representation to the buyer. But that's how that played out. It was interesting. We could have brought it to court, though. They said we could actually, although they would, as a realtor board, they prefer we don't go that route as realtors. We just stick within our own thing. But
I do know that, and I just have a quick question about that. So, it is my little knowledge is that when you go, was it new construction?
yeah.
So a lot of them put on there that you have to, the first visit has to be accompanied with new construction.
We looked at, actually in the town, it was Tingsboro, I believe. And I know the new construction agents in that area, and none of them said that. And I did mention that. I said, if that was such a strong concern for the sellers or list agent, why wasn't that noted? Although they can't even put that in MLS. One of the MLS rules states that you can't talk about not paying an agent just because they're not present at the first. They're acting in the capacity of a list agent at that point. As a seller's agent. That doesn't mean just because they spend time with a buyer.
I was just because I had that issue at one time with new construction.
Yes.
And I was having, but I did call the new construction people and I said, I have clients, but they wanna come down at this time. I can't make it. He flat out told me, if you don't make it to that first visit, I'm not paying you. So I just canceled, I canceled everything until I could make it. And I did go down there with him for the first time, but he was so adamant and almost rude about it. Like, well, I obviously can't make it at this time, but they are interested, this is the time they can make it. He's like, if they come without you.
Well, so the challenge I run into now is, I took someone to the board, right? So now I have this, I just had buyers ask me about another property in Tingsboro, and I saw his name and I was like,
I know, right? Yeah.
and you know, I always say to myself, was that necessarily the right course of action? At the time, I believed it was. Now I feel like,
You feel like you burned a bridge almost.
well, you know what I did though? So here's what the board ultimately said to me was, you changed his behavior, I can tell you that.
You
You know what I
corrected
mean?
his actions,
He
nobody
was
else
called
took
out,
up on it.
whether you got
That's
your
right.
permission or not, he
Yeah.
was called out.
That's true.
And he realizes that if you did it and you called him out and
Right.
you brought him to the board,
Somebody
the
else
next
will, who
person
keeps it
could
up.
do it and, yeah, so it's, you know, corrected or lose your license or fined
Yeah.
or whatever.
He
the-
probably has no ill will, because I feel like that with all the ones that we've been to for arbitration, I don't feel
I
any
would
ill
hope
will
not.
when somebody does it to us, because they have somebody that's upset about a commission. I prefer it. I prefer having a third party make a decision on it, so that
Yeah.
it's not up to what I think should happen. It's up to what a mediator says should happen, so.
And just so you know, it's not a new home construction rule or law. Coco Early, they do a lot of new construction. They will honor first visits without you being there. They will. But there are.
And you can't put it in MLS, because
No.
an MLS offering is unconditional.
Right, it's
So
binding.
they cannot put in MLS that you must accompany at the first.
I can't remember if it was in
A lot of them
MLS or
say
not,
that.
it was just that I had
It
called to make
shouldn't
an
be.
appointment.
Usually MLS will
And
kick
he
it back.
just flat out told me that, like, if you don't come the first time.
I mean, I could see their point, you know, like they're busy. If it's a community or development that's getting a lot of action, I get it, but
Well, I think there's more, if I can speak from having had a subdivision, sometimes you have people that come every single weekend, because it's great to come. And you as the listing agent have worked for weeks or whatever with these people coming and asking questions. And I had one in a subdivision, at the very end, they said, okay, we're ready to write an offer. So I brought all the paperwork in, the next day we were meeting, and they walk in the door with a buyer agent. I'm like, after
That is
all of
frustrating.
the
Yeah,
hours
Yeah.
of work that I put in, helping you along, answering your questions, so that's part of, being a listing agent for a subdivision is a whole different type of job.
yet I have sold new construction as a buyer's agent. And, you know, the people that have the systems in place, they staple my card to the file. There was never any question that if the buyer came after that, they would get in touch with me and, you know, so everybody was on the same page. Interesting, just a story.
I'm sorry, can I also?
Go ahead.
So-
Yes, go ahead.
So we have some people that are licensed in New Hampshire, and I just pulled up the buyer agency form for Mass. And in Mass, it says for the success fee that you have to pay in the event even within so many days of the term, following the term of this agreement, meaning I'm assuming the expiration. In New Hampshire, it clearly states that, you know, you put in, it says months, I think. So say you put in 3 months, but then it says unless they hire another licensed real estate professional. So in that case, that negates us from having procuring cause, correct?
New Hampshire says that?
Yes, it says it in
It's like a
the,
listing contract. If they list with somebody
right.
else,
It says it in both the listing and the buying. If they list with another licensee, then we no longer have, am I correct in that
So,
understanding?
yes, but so what I'm understanding is that in New Hampshire, they would have to hire another professional. They can't just say, hey, I'm
Correct,
ending this contract, I'm gonna sell this myself.
correct.
Yeah.
Wow.
Or buy, yeah, they wanna buy, even if a buyer finds a for sale by owner and says, oh, I'm not gonna work with, they're not gonna pay and I'm not gonna pay, so we'd still be owed a commission, but if they went and you hired KW, then we would be removed from that equation. That's what it says in the, I think it's the third article of the original sale.
I find that so interesting.
And I just have one last thing to say. Some courts have made the seller pay 2 commissions. Sometimes there's open listings, or there's no exclusive agency, and one agent would work with that particular buyer, and nothing has come of that. But because of the open agency, months later, this buyer, after looking for stuff, can't find anything else, comes back to the original seller and buys the property. Only if the seller knows that this is the same buyer and does not tell the second real estate agent, then the seller is obligated for both real estate commissions. Yeah. So it's always good to fight for the procuring cause. And like Stacey said earlier, it goes into arbitration, and depending on your chances, it's always good to go there because you're going to be getting something out of that, except for that one particular case that she said. Any questions? We've had a lot of good questions earlier, and so awesome. Thanks, Stacey.
Do you have a card?
I sell them for $5 a piece. How many do you? No, I'm just kidding.